your head up, moving on. Hold your head up, moving on. Keep your head up, moving on. Hold your head up, moving on. Keep your head up, moving on. Hold your head up, moving on. Sweet dreams are made out of these. Who am I to disagree? I travel the world in the 7 seas. Everybody's looking for something.
'Today is gonna be the day that they're gonna throw it back to you. By now you should have somehow realized what you got to do. I don't believe that anybody feels the way I do about you now. And all the roads we have to walk are winding, and all the lights that lead us there are blinding. And there are many things that I'd like to say to you, I don't know how. Backbeat, the word is on the street that the fire in your heart is out. And I'm sure you heard it all before, but you never really had any doubt. I don't believe anybody feels the way I do about you now. And all the roads we have to walk are winding, and all the lights that lead us there are blinding. And there are many things that I'd like to say to you, I don't know how, don't know how. Maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my wonder wall. You're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all, you're my wonder wall. Maybe you're gonna be the one that saves me. And after all,
take this badge off of me. I can't use it anymore. It's getting dark, much too dark to see. Feel I'm knocking on heaven's door. 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 Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Mama, wipe this blood from my face. I'm sick and...
Hola, hola. Hola, si ens feu el favor...
Okay, so if you could please come in and take a seat, we will shortly be starting. Thank you all very much.
Si us sembla...
Okay, so if you agree, we can start this new edition of the annual conference of Centre Delàs de Estudis per la Pau, together with the Institut de Drets de Catalunya. First, I'd obviously like to thank you for being here today. I see many people once again, one more year, have decided to come to this conference, and I'd also like to thank the City Council of Barcelona and the Provincial Council for making this project possible. I'd also like to thank all of our exceptional panelists we have: Ana Barrero, Feliu Gaucomanan, Carlos Freixa, Paulo Escobar and Paulo Moraes, and our facilitators, Tika and Laia. And I think we couldn't have chosen a better time to hold this conference, focusing on the topic in these days where it's become obvious that amidst this ecological and social crisis that is accelerated by the predator patriarchal capitalist, now it makes it more urgent than ever to support life, a process where cities play and will play a key role in building human security, community security based on managing vulnerability, fighting against violence, fighting for all rights for all people, in contraposition with the European states, which are increasingly investing in security. They're increasing their budgets in defense, border patrol, to keep migrant people and racialized people others. Another security is possible and urgent, it's desirable, and it is what will allow us to face up to those who want to use this feeling of despair and the growing inequalities to sow hatred and to pinpoint people in social and political conflicts. That is to use hard measures against this legitimate feel of unease. We need a different kind of security that includes the links, the dependence between local security and global phenomena. The war in Ukraine is a latest example of how international conflicts have an impact on us and on our perception of insecurity and our objective security. So we need another security that transforms conflict and violence, a security that isn't based on punishment, that doesn't nourish the culture of punishment, which then has a ripple effect in the militarization. It's a security that feeds the culture of peace. We need a just peace without systems of domination, without the structural domination. We need a kind of security that brings back the original sense of the world, a security that allows us to live with our vulnerabilities and in coexistence with others. Thank you very much once again for being here today. Okay, so it's an honor for the Institute of Human Rights of Catalonia to be part of this panel. And we thank you for being here and for showing an interest in being here with us to talk about peace and a broad approach on what active pacifism should be. War is the greatest attack on human rights because it denies human rights. Exercising radical violence leads to destruction and death, and it was as a result of the devastation at all levels that came with the Second World War. That is when we came with an ambitious system to protect human rights within the UN system. This system was created with the goal of building sustainable peace and security to avoid future conflicts. And as I see it, these are the main axes. We have to build peace, prevent conflict, and it has to be done in a sustainable way. The connection between peace and human rights is undeniable, and working to prevent conflicts, focusing on human rights, reaffirming them is the way ahead. Social justice, which means enjoying each of and every one of the human rights for our citizens, is the best way of preventing conflict and to make peace sustainable. The systemic violence of an unfair and excluding social order is not peace, and it doesn't guarantee sustainable peace and security. Experience has taught us that violence leads to violence. Aggressive discourse, police, militarization, arms, this all leads to more violence and less security. So from the administrations, the academia, civil society organizations and cities, we have to work together to prevent conflict and to denounce all forms of violence and to come up with alternatives to this dominant mainstream discourse. And with conferences like today, we're going along the right path. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Centre Delàs and the Institut de Drets de Catalunya and for inviting the Provincial Council of Barcelona to this conference, and I'd like to congratulate you for organizing this conference. I think if we look at the two adjectives in the title, possible and urgent, in front of it, discourse is saying things are what they are. The discourse of war has permeated into all layers of society and government, and looking at another possible and urgent, that another security is possible and urgent, is more necessary than ever because it has a huge impact and it's fundamental. We have a framework that is the 2030 agenda, which has sneered at recently, but the goal 16 talks about promoting peaceful cities for sustainable development, and this relates to the role that cities have to guarantee peaceful coexistence as a global part of the local authorities. And we from the Provincial Council of Barcelona, we have stated peace and peace building with our territories at a center stage. Without peace there are no human rights. It all goes hand in hand, and we think it's important to have a strong alliance between local governments, civil society, citizens, as guarantors of peace, as builders of a culture of peace, and as actors that can help prevent conflicts emerging. So in this sense, creating spaces to exchange and learn from one another are essential, because we can share amongst the different actors and we can come up with common answers to meet the rapid changes in our society and to stand up against this culture of violence. And in this regard, I'd also like to highlight our strong commitment, together with Centre Delàs and Institut de Drets de Catalunya, to support the task you do and to support your initiatives such as the UCLG prize, which favors initiatives for peace. And I think we'll hear from Palmira, the winner of this prize. Also the International Network Mayors for Peace. We will launch a study on decentralized cooperation and how decentralized cooperation, that is the cooperation done at a local level, can help to build peace at a local level. And that's all. I mean, we are here with our strong commitment to generate these spaces, and we think that from the local level is where we can come up with new discourse that break away from certain dynamics that we hear from the state. I hope the conference will be fruitful and that we will have the opportunity to hear many interesting things. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thanks to the Centre Delàs, the Institut de Drets Humans and IPP. It's a pleasure being here with so many renowned people. We are missing Jaume and Octavi, of course, but in any case we are amongst friends, so we can go straight to the point. We are witnessing a very strong contradiction where we are losing our cultural war. We've just lived a pandemic which has led to thousands of deaths. Things haven't worked well in our old people's homes. Many people died. There have been failures. There were more victims than we should have had. The healthcare system is under a lot of tension in Madrid, in Barcelona, and in many other places. So we are witnessing Russia's illegitimate invasion in the Ukraine, and we forget many things, and we tend to think that to confront our world we have to increase our budgets dedicated to weapons, legitimately in the case of Ukraine, but not so in other places. So we are all drawn in by a solution which makes no sense, especially in cities. Cities are the goal of nuclear weapons, which once again are gaining in importance in this dialectic war between Russia, the US, and the Western world. And moreover, none of the weapons or militarization will help us overcome the problems we face in cities. It won't help overcome the housing problems with people who haven't a house, nor will it help us overcome the healthcare situation or find employment for youth. So from in a municipalist movement, we need to work to redefine human security, as you are doing. We need to come up with a conceptual framework that will allow us to stand up against the militarist escalade. There are many political groups that say this is a natural solution, but we need an anti-militarist framework, as I was saying, because it makes no sense. It's absurd. And therefore, we thank you for organizing this annual conference to define this framework. We, as in the best way we've been able to do so from the institution I represent, we've tried aligning with the pacifist movement instead of this bellicose escalade which is so much present in media, in institutions, in the Spanish government. It's never easy. I mean, the Ukrainian groups living here in Catalonia sometimes ask us to show our position. I mean, we welcome mayors of, like the mayor of Kiev, who have a legitimate defense discourse, but our lemma as a city cannot be this. We don't want us to be targeted by missiles, and we don't want armies dominated by characters like Putin or Biden to dominate the military power. We're not at all interested in this. So we have to find a way of countering this power. And at Barcelona, thankfully, we have several pacifist organizations and movements, which, yes, we do grow older, and we have to discuss this, as Christian told us, and we have to look at how we can connect with our youth who perhaps don't see this threat in the same way as we do. Last year we organized the World Peace Conference. We were all very satisfied. And this year, with the war in Ukraine, we're doing the best we can. Today, with the firefighters of Barcelona and cooperation, you know that in Barcelona we have a policy for global justice, and Barcelona is taking part in some of the problems that are happening in the world, and to help respond and overcome the harmful effects of this, we have started a collaboration with our pairs, in this case with the City Council of Kiev, which is governed by a man who is a world boxing champion. He's 2 meters tall. But well, we more or less came to an understanding with the mayor of Kiev, because what we want to do from the City Council is to defend citizens, also those of Kiev, instead of defending territories, which is what states would do. So we were able to send firefighters to Kiev, and when the Kremlin bombarded the center of Kiev, amongst the bodies we were able to see a firefighter lorry from Barcelona, and despite feeling sad, we felt that we were useful, and now we're trying to send power generators, which is what Kiev is asking for. So we are having city to city response, although we have to go through the civil protection authorities of the Ukraine, which then shares out the resources. We'll be doing this to the best of our extent. We do not have a Department of Defense, so politically speaking, we have firefighters, which make it easier, and we can help boost our discourse through facts, but we need to share with other mayors and other people working in city councils. We have to share about this pacifist movement. We do so with Mayors for Peace, and now with the nuclear powers we have to exert greater pressure on the Spanish government so that it signs the treaty to ban nuclear weapons. It hasn't yet. Ireland has today, and we have to come up with an alternative discourse to this warfare discourse to put back into the center of security all of those aspects which really have to do and are important for human security. Thank you very much. Before giving the floor to our first panel, allow me to give the floor to the Mayor of Oost, who is the chair of the International Committee of the Netherlands Municipality. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to this conference, because I think it's very important to discuss the role of the cities and civil society in contributing to peace and security. And I think security is not only the absence of war, it goes beyond that. And we need to seek a truly people-focused understanding of security. And because all the challenges we are facing, we make people feel insecure. And that leads to tensions within our own communities. And to ensure security for our communities, we as local governments cannot just focus on suppressing these violence. We need to understand the fabric of our communities and the source of the tensions, and especially the perspectives of the most vulnerable. And understanding these dynamics of opportunities will unfold that allow pathways to prevent violence. And we do have the responsibility and the capacity to build bridges amongst groups and to continue dialogue within our people. And sometimes local level opens doors for dialogue that have been closed at the national level. So we have to talk to each other. We have to keep talking to each other. And through its peace agenda, United Cities and local governments can be a hub for local governments in the field of peace building. And for example, the municipal peace talks provide a platform for dialogue and exchange. And a practical instrument of this peace agenda is the UCLG Peace Prize. And with this award, we raise recognition for the important roles that local governments can play in enhancing peace in their communities. We collect strong examples from all over the world, and we give them a stage to inspire their colleagues. And even though the context might be different, local governments throughout the world are often facing very similar challenges. With us here today, with you, are two of the champions of this year's edition of the Peace Prize. Paulo Moares, he will share the story of his project in Recife in Brazil, and it brought him to the final. And Mayor Escobar will speak about the initiative that made Palmira in Colombia the winner of this award. And stories like theirs can inspire colleagues worldwide to develop similar initiatives. And to this end, we have to grow this Peace Prize, the UCLG Peace Prize, together. An increasing number of partners are supporting this initiative, and it's great to know that Mr. Antonio Monsenay, who's representing one of these partners, is at this inaugural table as well. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying I really appreciate the opportunity to give this little talk about our wonderful Peace Prize. And I'm looking forward and hope to have the opportunity to meet you in person some other time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Ara sí, us deixem amb la primera taula.
And now we will move on to the first inaugural panel, the first panel of today, and we hope you enjoy it.
Hola.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes? Great. Okay, so we'll start off with this first panel. We've been asked to speak in Spanish because it is being streamed online and it has been interpreted into English. So they will be interpreting from Spanish to English. So I will switch to Spanish now. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Centre Delàs for entrusting me and for inviting me to this conference. I am Laia Soldevila. I am from a Catalan media outline called Critic. I'm sure many of you here in the room will have heard of this media outlet. And basically, we practice slow journalism, as we call it, where we delve into reflections. And when talking of conflict, we always remember the professor of the Autonomous University and one of the persons behind the master's degree in conflict and peace, Xavi Giró, who always says that at times of conflicts we have to open up our perspective, move away from simplification and look for other frameworks. We can't just explain the military battles. We have to ask ourselves who is winning in the war and what is civil society doing besides going to the battlefield. We have to explain other things that maybe journalism won't allow for the war to stop from one day to the other. But Xavi Giró said journalism can contribute to mobilize citizens to achieve peace. We have to change the cultural frameworks we are living. And I think that with this approach is how we're looking at this conference with Rafa Poch. I think is one of the three journalists who has reflected more about the war in Ukraine, but also reflected on other conflicts, and he is who's talked the most about historical, economic and cultural frameworks. I guess many of you know Rafa Poch. He was the international correspondent. He was an international correspondent for almost 4 decades in Russia and Beijing. He was an author of books on Putin, China. He wrote a collective essay on Germany in the Euro crisis, and he is also a professor of international relations at UNED. His chat will be very interesting. The idea behind his conference, and I will give him the floor in a second. He'll have around 35 minutes for his presentation. Then we will open the floor in case you have any questions or doubts. We'll leave some time for that. But basically, given that the title of this presentation is on security, we will think of what we understand by international security. How is this international security framed? Who will win the war? What's happening? What is this war all about? Are we talking of war alone, or are there many other things mixed into this war? And ultimately, who will win the war, and what will the war look like if the war ends soon? So we'll try answering this question. So Rafa, whenever you like, the floor is yours. Thank you, Laia. Well, yes, good afternoon, everyone. I don't have much time, a lot to talk about. The title of my presentation is Scenarios for International Security After the War in Ukraine. That's quite a lot. There's too much uncertainty to talk about this, to be honest, because after the war in Ukraine, we have no idea what will happen, because we won't know what the outcome to this war will be. First, what we do know is what do we understand by international security. And here I'd venture to say that anything that brings us closer to mitigating or overcoming or solving the challenges of this century will contribute to international security. That is, anything helping us to deal with climate warming, social and regional inequalities, overpopulation, the proliferation of resources of mass destruction. So anything that helps us to move closer to finding a solution to these problems will contribute to a more stable international security. However, if we ask ourselves what will happen after the war in Ukraine, first we'd need to know who will win the war. And to answer this question, we first must answer the previous question, and that is, what war are we talking about? Because the problem is there isn't one single war, there are at least 3 simultaneous wars. The other day I was reading an article by Susan Watchings where she could find 5 wars combined into, and I like to say there are 3. These 3 ongoing wars are the Russia's reactionary war against the Ukraine, which was a clear example, a textbook example. It's David against Goliath, a nation of 145 million against a much smaller nation, in theory a weaker nation, with a very questionable rhetoric trying to justify the war. It was a war where the Russian autocratic regime was trying to consolidate its power. But we also see a Ukrainian civil war, which dates back to before the invasion. Without this, without the annexation of the Ukraine and the revolts in Donbass, would have been unthinkable, or very difficult at least. We must remember that if this reactionary invasion started on February the 22nd this year, the background from 2014 in Ukraine with the Maidan and the change in regime, that was in 2014, quite a number of years ago. And that is where the internal balance in Ukraine broke apart amongst regions, and there's a part of the country that didn't agree with the change of regime in Kiev, and therefore this part of the country reacted. And it reacted in different ways. In Lugansk and Donetsk, there was a genuine popular uprising against Maidan. What happened in Kiev was a mixed popular uprising with an operation to change the regime sponsored by the West. What happened in Donetsk and Luhansk was an armed popular revolt, which was quite genuine. Miners and workers who raised in arms, some local oligarchs as well, and local industries who clearly saw that integrating into the EU they would be wiped off the map. And then months later Russia took the occasion to dig into the wounds. In Crimea, different things were going on. The population was annexed by Russia. It was an easy operation because the population agreed. The army, the Russian troops were there. And in many other places there were uprisings of different intensities and different levels of violence, which were quashed to more or less extent. In Odessa, where I was, there were demonstrations with tens of thousands. On the 2nd of May 2024 there was a massacre where they killed 50 people. In Mariupol on 9th May there was a massacre with 10 dead. The army fired at the people. In Kharkiv there was a meeting of 3,800 elected members who signed a manifesto against the change of regime in Kiev, and the police broke in and beat them all up. But in other regions a civil war broke out. Why? Well, because what happened in Kiev in 2014 broke a historical consensus among the regions, eastern and western regions in Ukraine. And to put it simply, they are 2 regions with completely different identities, completely different histories, with religious, language diversity. This does not mean that they were condemned to living in confrontation. In fact, up till then, they had coexisted in a very democratic way, quite an admirable way. But that broke down thanks to the contribution of external Western forces, also Russian, but it's the Western powers who promoted the coup in Kiev. So this reactionary war of Russia against the Ukraine also has an internal dimension. But at the same time, as it happens, there's another war, the war of Russia against NATO or NATO against Russia. Who's Goliath and who's David in this other war? One spends 14 times more in war than Ukraine. It's much more powerful in all fields. And we could even say that Russia here would be David, right? The weaker side in this war against NATO. And it's something that Putin is including in his discourse on the war. He has a discourse focusing on the global south, BRICS, saying we're here standing up, but behind of us we have the whole of the global south. And the war of NATO against Russia goes back 30 years. There is a very clear participation of NATO in this chart, especially since 2014. Let's remember that in 2008 NATO invited the Ukraine to join the alliance in the conference in Bucharest when William Barnes, who today is the director of the CIA, was the US ambassador in Kiev. And thanks to Julian Assange, we now know that in February 2008, a few months before the NATO conference in Bucharest, Barnes warned that the issue of the Ukraine's access to NATO could divide or split the country in two and take it to violence or even the civil war. Russia will feel that it can respond more energetically to actions that go against its national interest. That's a quote that I like particularly, but there are many, many outstanding political figures, not just in Russia but also in the West, who for years had been warning that this was an act of provocation and a red line.
The invitation for the NATO admission was done in moments where the Ukrainian population were not in favor of being admitted in the NATO. 30% was in favor, another 30% of the population preferred an alliance with Russia, and 30-something% remaining preferred the status of neutrality. So that had nothing to do with the legitimate right of being admitted to the NATO. It was forced in 2014. That was resolved because that's when the state took over the power. And starting 2014, this started that we see on the slide, which is that the Ukraine was not in the NATO, but NATO was in the Ukraine. And this is a map. It's a Russian map. It maybe looks like propaganda, and some of the figures might have been deformed and inflated. The yellow and blue are non-official. The blue ones are recognized and official of Russian facilities in the Ukraine. And you can find a bit of everything here, some military headquarters, and there's with the border of Russia, and then there's next to Crimea, so NATO bases next on the border with Russia, and then out in the Chapov, in the Nikolaev region, next to Crimea, we have two dots with a naval base in construction by the Americans, and another point for the United Kingdom fleet. And all of this could be just small details. In Mariupol, there's a center of training for shooters, for a couple of brigades, maybe for snipers specifically. In Lamorov, in the region of the Bov, in the western part of the country, there was something serious going on here. It was a 200 square meter area, as big as the Paris municipality, and we know this not because of the Russian propaganda, but because of what the United States press has been telling us since the conflict started, where tens of thousands of soldiers have been trained. Ukrainian military by 8 NATO countries. This is on this training field. We know that between 2014 and 2020, 80,000 Ukrainian troops were trained from ex-KGB and the Special Forces troops by the NATO. Tens of thousands of dollars were awarded for this, were granted for this. That's between 2014 and 2020. So that's before the invasion. And we know because of the United States press sources, we know that since the war started, the NATO has fixed their eyes and their ears on the Ukrainian army, which used to be a fiasco, but it's not anymore right now. It has become in a much more powerful force. What do I mean by eyes and ears? What I mean is that the Russian commands is maintaining an operational command at some point. The United States will know about this because they have a extremely sophisticated listening technology apparatus, and they will know where they are meeting, and that's why the Ukrainians launched a missile there, precisely there, and this is why Russians have lost 13 generals in the first few months of the campaign. The first moments of the campaign where Putin was considering it as a short-term victory. Putin thought that taking over the Rostov airport and advancing with troops near Kiev, this would entail that the Ukrainian army would go into panic, and only very far-right small groups like the Azovs would remain. Well, it wasn't like that because of many reasons. First of all, because of the badly done work by the Russian intelligence, but because of also other military factors and human factors. We cannot forget about the will of the Ukrainian peoples to take the weapons, to take the arms to defend their territory. Around the Kiev region in Kharkov, there was no problem about that. There was no problem for Russians to take over the region in these more Russophile regions, Kharkov, Zaporizhia. All of these regions were less difficult for Russians to take over and to occupy. But around the Kiev area, there was a greater resistance. In the Hostomel airport, it seems that the operation was not expected by the Russian troops. Some planes were taken down in full flight, and that was told by the New York Times, because the Americans knew exactly what was moving and where from. So missiles were directed very specifically. One of the key aspects of the Russian operation in the few hours of the invasion when they were trying to take over total area and control to eliminate the adversary, it was seen that this was not possible because Ukrainians were informed, this is where you're going to be attacked, move around, and this is how something was saved. Not all of it, but a lot was able to be saved, by which the supposed Russian aerial superiority was not such any longer. The Stingers and the anti-missiles provided by the Americans have proven to be very valuable for the Ukrainians, and they have been providing about 90 billion dollars for this. Biden 30% more than the Russian military budget for the year. So in this context, we can ask ourselves, who's David and who's Goliath? Of course, Russians were the ones who started the invasion, who did the invasion, and that was not licit, that was evil. It is also true that in the 90s, there were some attempts for negotiations, even if they were not well known here, because the NATO expansion was something that was taken for granted. But in Russia, they would never agreed with that. And the Minsk agreements were where the Americans didn't participate. And the Ukrainians, we now know, because Poroshenko, the president, said so a few months ago, our role there was to win time. Meanwhile, we would be increasing and improving our army. So the conversations had the goal of leaving those French and Germans aside, who didn't really want to come to fruitful negotiations anyway. And then it was openly said that the future of the conflict around Donbass and Crimea was not going to be achieved through negotiation, but through military battle. And then in September 2022, a few months afterwards, the United States signed an agreement embracing this view or this opinion. Therefore, the invasion was not fair and a dirty trick and nasty thing, but it was also provoked. There was a provocation for it. And we've got a third word, according to what some high representatives from the United States say. This was the war of the United States against China to try to stop the China dominion, and to try and stop the gas pipelines connecting Russia with Germany. Moreover, there are clear preceding events in the year 80s. Willy Brandt and Smith and all his colleagues inaugurated the energetic regulation between the Soviet Union and Germany. The signing of those contracts provoked a great tantrum in the US, where they resisted in every way possible to try and avoid that these agreements would be signed. Helmut Schmidt ended up saying, whatever they say, we are going to sign these agreements because this is interesting for us. This is beneficial for us. It was a different political generation. Nowadays, what they did would be qualified differently. But we were living in a different world. In any case, that agreement was signed. And in 1982, in the summer, the gas pipeline coming out of the Soviet Union was blown apart. There was an unknown explosion of unknown official causes in 1982. But thanks to the CIA agent information, which were published in 2007 or 2012, I can remember, this ex-CIA agent said this was a CIA terrorist attack who sent people to introduce a special software with a series of components which the Soviet Union bought in the Western world in order to assemble these oil pipelines. So what happened recently with Nord Stream has antecedents. It had happened before. It had happened a few weeks before there were demonstrations in Germany asking to recover the gas pipeline negotiations and relationship with Russia after a few military circulations and transits in the Baltic Sea, which was quite suspicious because this is a sea quite controlled by the NATO, because not a single fish goes by without NATO controlling it. It's quite an easy sea to control. And the most interesting thing about it is that a Bundestag deputy member asked the federal government in parliament, and she asked a question in parliament, which ships were in the Nord Stream area in the days before the attack, which NATO ships, which naval forces, which Polish resources, which battleships from Russia were passing by, which explosives were used, all of these questions. And the answer from the federal government to a deputy in parliament was in written that because of state reasons, because of reasons of the state government stability, these reasons could not be disclaimed. And this is what's been happening. Unveiled, couldn't be unveiled. So, couldn't be disclosed. So the area has been remilitarized. By Washington and its eastern helpers from the European Union, with Polish friends who are now playing a main role in the area. And they are in favor of saying things such as the Second World War was a shared responsibility between Stalin and Hitler, or saying things like Russia, which is a criminal state, is a sponsor of terrorism, which has nothing to do with reality, and other allies from the east of Europe. And this is being told by one of them, Charles Richards, one of the main military heads of the military. And last week, he declared in the New York Times that this is only a starter. This is only an appetizer. This Ukrainian crisis, he says, where we find ourselves, is only a warming up for the big one, for the big crisis that is still to come. And it won't be long before we are put to test in ways which we have not known for very long. In this same report, New York Times report, there's a very interesting information. We must say that the United States press are giving a whole lot more information than the European press. When you read the press, the Spanish press, for example, you can't really understand much when they're telling us about missiles, the last indiscriminate civil targets, the indiscriminate bombings against Ukraine, against the Ukrainian cities. Russians are saying they are against electric headquarters and military centers. And this is explained after the first wave of bombings. It was explained bombarded by Russia against electric power plants, communication centers, far from inhabited neighborhoods, far from the urban centers and the cities. This we haven't read in any Spanish press. These are the three wars that I wanted to describe to you, and that we are living after this. We can ask ourselves, who's going to win these wars? They tell us, concerning the Russia-Ukraine, they tell us it's Ukraine winning the war, but the reality is that Russia is controlling 100 square kilometers out of the 600,000 square meters making up the Ukraine. Of course, in Kiev, there's a lot of control by Ukrainian, but it's only 100,000 square kilometers that Ukraine is controlling. I don't think that the Ukraine is winning the war when Zelensky is calling out about the Third World War, asking for an area exclusion area, asking for preventive coups against Moscow, asking for demanding nuclear weapons for the Ukraine, for saying, declaring that the 2 missiles that fell on Poland were Russian missiles, and then North Americans said they're Ukrainian, and they said no, it's the Russian, and that was when things are starting to be inconsistent. They're starting to kind of, it doesn't match. The atomic nuclear center is dangerous. Nobody's telling us who's trying to bombard that. The OEA is controlled by the Western world. The Russians are occupying that atomic power plant militarily, therefore it cannot be the Russians attacking it. Zelensky, therefore, is not winning the war. The proof of this is that he's calling out for a Third World War. So who's winning then? The United States? Well, the United States is a country undergoing a great uncertainty and a great crisis. There are books being published denouncing new civil war. A year ago, there was a kind of a coup with those Vikings marching over the Congress with President Trump did not acknowledge his not winning the elections, his defeat. So why helping the Ukraine so much? Are they really winning much from this? I'm just asking myself. So who's winning? Is it Russia? It's not Russia either. I don't think so. Not really, because this territorial dominion that Russia has in this area is more apparent than real. If we have a big Russian offensive in the winter and they reach Odessa, blocking out every exit to the sea for the Ukraine, which could be possible, the dominion of Russia over these regions, and the ethnopolitical composition of these areas, which has changed a lot since the start of the war, because those who have fled, they fled, and the first ones to flee were the pro-Kiev, and those who stayed are the least anti-Russians and the poorest too, must be said. No Spanish journalist is interviewing refugees in Mariupol, in Moscow, in Rostov, in Warsaw, in Paris, in different places. You'll find all kinds of opinions, people blaming the Russians, people blaming Ukrainians, people feeling angry and wronged because their children were killed on either side. In best of scenarios, there would be an unstable dominion by police administrations, strongly repressive police administrations. If there were only a minority of Ukrainians in a situation of occupation who wanted to resist, that minority would have the support of Kiev and the support by NATO. There would be anti-terrorism, there would be torture, there would be disappeared people, and that would not be stable for Russia, and therefore Russia is not winning either. Therefore, if nobody is winning, what can we expect? A planning, a marching backwards, as it has been suggested in the last conversations between William Barnes, who was also warning about the bad consequences of admitting the Ukraine in the NATO and its homologous adversary Umutin. Well, things are being said, and my impression about this is there's going to be no winners. There are only defeated here, only people losing here. So many victims, so many refugees, not only the Czech Republic, 1 million, in Poland, 1.5 million, in Germany, 1 million, in Russia also millions of them. It's a lot of people, very high numbers. So if this is how things are, how can we stop this war? The first reflection is not feeding it with weapons. Understanding its complexity, understanding its genesis, coming from many years back, understanding its responsibilities. The most modern thing we can say about it is that these are shared responsibilities, and if this is the case, then the pacifist movements, anti-war movements will make more sense than ever, and it will be necessary to have a social pressure for negotiations. There have been demonstrations for peace in the Czech Republic and Germany. Things are starting to happen in Germany. I think this is the best horizon possible that we should be thinking about from the civil society, and this is where I live it. Thank you very much.
Pues gracias, Rafa. Vamos a abrir el micrófono.
We are now going to open the mic for the audience, and I would like to start with one question. The idea will be to gather a few questions one after the other, and then Rafael will answer them together. I would like to launch one first question. I was reading some of our sentences on the internet. Your sentence was, in Europe there will only be security with Russia, not without Russia. And most definitely there will not be security against Russia. What did you mean by that? What I meant by that is something that's quite simple for anyone who can add and subtract. A nuclear superpower, 145 million people with a long history. They have been invaded by Western forces in the last recent years, Swedish, Polish, Germans many times, with a bad fortune. The North Americans with the Civil War in the north, they've been invaded by all. Their geographic extension is extraordinary. They don't have any geographical barriers. They don't have any mountains. Therefore, historically, their defense has been expansion always. So distance with NATO was what was agreed at the end of the Cold War, and this was broken. And this is something that is well known for those who will have some memory or who would like to read what has been written in the archives that we have available. It will be clear to understand by looking at this image that a nuclear superpower can't be surrounded by infrastructures, by an adversary military bloc. And this is what the United States is doing, not only with Russia, but also with China. These bases are all around Russia, all around China. It's not all NATO. Some of them are United States. Southern Korea is not in the NATO. Although they're participating in the summits lately, they have been participating. But everybody will understand that if you're placing missiles in Cuba in 1962, there will be some threats of a world war. There will be someone getting angry. So I think Zelensky is playing the role of Fidel Castro here. Fidel Castro was very angry with Khrushchev when he found out that Khrushchev and Kennedy were negotiating moving back. Zelensky wants a third world war, but Castro and Zelensky are different characters from every point of view. One was a great man of state from the 20th century, and the other one, in my opinion, he was a political dwarf from a regime that didn't have any project beyond the fact that they were combating the invader, which was licit. But what was behind that? It was just being a yeoman of the Western world. Poland multiplied by 10 in a militarized way. Multinationals, North American multinationals, have always bought 2 million hectares of the Ukrainian territory. And most of the population is against privatization. This is the horizon that is awaiting the Ukraine. It's clear enough that we cannot do things against Russia and why we must negotiate. Sorry, can we have interventions which will be as short as possible so that we can have as many as possible? Yes, we can take one after the other and then we can take the answers. Very quickly. You have said it, you said in the beginning, the problem we have is not just the Ukraine war, but it seems that the United States, the NATO, has the intention of turning the planet into a place of division in blocks, because the Ukraine will obviously push alliances in order to put an end to the expansion towards the Asian Southeast, as it was declared in the NATO July summit, considering China as a destabilizer country for the future. And I know you said that in the beginning, it's difficult to talk about the future, but it seems that this scenario is a possible one. Will this lead to a new Cold War? Will that be possible? Any others? A question, but I'd like to know your opinion about this. We know that in this war, it's what is also being fought is who's going to be the competitor of the United States for world hegemony. The United States considers China to be its competitor, and I think Russia wanted to be a world power. 2 or 3 weeks ago, at the end of October, the United States published its safety strategy just a few days ago. What I was surprised about is that in that document they are saying that for the United States, Russia is not a power that is going to compete. Russia is left to second line, and for them it's clear. In a certain way, I think the United States wants to let Russia come down to wear Russia out in the eyes of the world, and so that they will not feel capable of claiming for a place in the world. First thing I'd like to say is thank you, Rafael, for your presentation. I think it was a luxury to listen to your version of what's happening in the Ukraine, just as it is a luxury to read your articles. I feel thankful to you. I wish there were many other journalists with your courage. So to overcome this place of yeoman, if it had been Mr. Pesk instead of what we have, what would be the most urgent points of your action, in your opinion? Let's start with these three, maybe. We have a long time. We don't have a long time. It's a shame not to be able to spend a long time for each of these questions. Long-term Cold War, yes and no. I mean, what we are seeing does not look exactly like the Cold War we had in the past. What is happening with China does look a lot like Cold War, the chip affair in October, and that Biden decision announcing total restrictions. That is a very serious thing. Before the Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, the sending of chips has been stopped. The Chinese haven't said anything. Maybe this is the proof of how dangerous that is for them. Financially, industrially, what the Western world has control over this, over 70% of the provision of chips. China is investing big amounts of money in this, so it will be difficult for them to overcome this situation. Every month and a half, or every month, we have contacts between military forces of the United States and China and the Channel. This is so dangerous. Even if nobody wants a war, not even the most pro-war falcons of the hawks in the United States military, that is dangerous contact. There could be accidents. One could lose face. How to reconstruct that? They're playing with fire over there. Having said that, I would say that we are not in a paradigm of Cold War. The paradigm of Cold War was the world of disciplined alliances, alliances where there was history, but now what we have is quite strange. It's a kind of a free market of international relations. Rather than institutionalized alliances, what we have in front of us is a constant playing tug of war with different disciplines. Turkey, for example, member of the NATO, they are playing a game with Russia, and it is extraordinary in some senses. They are also fighting over Libya and Syria, but they're able to reach certain specific agreements in some places, and that is quite surprising. Putin is doing it well. Israel is not getting involved with the Ukraine issue as they should. Saudi Arabia, what can be said about Saudi Arabia? What they're doing with oil is totally historic. They opposed the increase of production. They are playing along with Russia. They're not playing along with Russia. They're doing their own game. They're playing their own game. So this international relations scenario is quite interesting. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, the one before the last republic from the Soviet Union, it had no power. In the Dushanbe press, we can read messages by the government advising their Tajik citizens living in Russia, working as migrant workers, not to accept under no pretext the offers that Russia is offering the migrant workers to enroll in the armies in exchange for papers. They are being granted citizenship in exchange for going to war. So who's really in charge? Is it China? Is it Russia? Kazakhstan has a double game there, double policy. So we're living moments of big games. And it seems that this fluidity is not the same as Cold War. The cold butter of the Shanghai pachyderm, I ask myself, covering an enormous extent of the world, has established some kind of, not even an alliance, something that kind of works, could work, but it's becoming extraordinarily huge. So this Chinese soft butter, isn't it going to become more consistent than the forged iron of NATO? This NATO, where Orban will say one thing, Erdogan will say something else, France will say nothing, but then Germany will shoot its own feet with their actions with Russia. Very crazy things are happening indeed. And second question about Russia. Rather than Russia, I would like to talk about the Russian elite. Russia has some relations, interests, but it is Russia defining the guideline, setting the standard. It is Russia setting the standard. They know they are not in the Soviet Union bipolar world of URSS and United States. It's not like that. But it's not either the situation where they've received such treatment in the last 30 years. When the Chechens were beating the Russians in Chechnya, Russia could be considered as a piece of crap, you know, the Russian army, but now it's not the case anymore. They're just asking for some respect. They want to say if the Baltic Republic is a red line and don't leave them as neutral countries, don't admit them in the NATO, don't establish military settlements all around us with anti-miss in Romania, in Poland, against the danger of Iranian missiles, when everybody knows that Iranis don't have strategic missiles. They don't have missiles capable of reaching Europe. If you want to counterpart the strategic danger by Iran or the Iran missiles, you might place batteries in Azerbaijan, but not in Romania and Poland. So for so many years, more than 20 years, the Russian elite has been offended, and they are also offended because their legitimate interests are not taken into account in the market, in the world market. We are capitalists like you, they seem to be saying, but we are not considered as equals. We are in favor of kind of robbery as well, but you are only treating us as auxiliary or subordinates to you. We are Russia, 1,000 years of greatness, imperial history. You can't treat us like a banana republic. And this strange neocon Slavic discourse by leaders who are looking down at the global south with multipolar alternative is contrasting the Western hegemonism. Tika, Paul, you are right when you say that they want to overextend Russia, and this was precisely the heading of a paper of the Royal Corporation that you probably know from 2013 that was entitled Stressing Russia. Yeah, the strategy of the United States is to stress Russia, that's right. To make them make steps that will go beyond their ability, their capacity, so that in the end they will fall in the trap. I was thinking about it before that article by Royal Corporation where Russia intervened in Syria, and I thought this is so dangerous. Russia is so weak. Why would they go into Syria? Back in 2015, when it was a wasp's nest and a hornet's nest, and was the whole mess. But I was convinced that there would end up being a conflict with Western Europe. So it wasn't about Russian interests in the Tartus naval base. What military presence does Russia have in the Mediterranean? None. So no, it wasn't about that. Yes, it is about stressing Russia, and I agree with you. That is one of the goals. It's an official goal of the most influential think tank of this public military and political establishment of the United States. If my grandma was called Gonzalo and she had a beard, she wouldn't be my grandmother, as a Russian saying says. Mr. Pesk, I think, is a post who is self-destroyed. I know Mr. Borrell is trying to carry out an external politics that will make 27 countries agree, and this is it's like an orchestra out of tune, and the only one that's in tune seems to be the United States, but they have their enormous economical interest, and as well as that Germany's economic interest, doing something with France, and the Baltic countries shouting from out there. Very, very complicated. If I were Mr. Pesk, I think I would be on the verge of a fit of panic. I think we have to leave it here, because each of the answers could lead to a thesis, but it was necessary to have that. So let's just have one more question, and then we'll have a break for 10 minutes. I think I answered this question already. But if I have 2 extra minutes that Laia is giving me, I would like to share this image from a NATO institute called OFAN, which is in charge of the NATO propaganda. It's one of the many institutes that we have, carried out by far-right people, Poland people, Baltic countries, and it's what is doing Russia in the Ukraine is a genocide, according to this, and those who don't agree with this statement, they are apologists of the genocide, according to the NATO propaganda. The anti-fascist is a subtype of Group A, extreme far-right. You know, extremes are very close together. D are the stubborn, those who are always against. When they read white, they say, no, it's black. And then the pacifist, stupid ones, which are most of us, most of us would be falling into. This is the propaganda that NATO is offering us. And there was a research by the Adelaide University being published yesterday, where even if this is an independent university, so this is an independent university, 5 million tweets were analyzed about the Ukraine in the first waves and weeks of the invasion. 80% of the tweets in the first weeks were originated in propaganda, manufacturing centers, in propaganda factories. 38,000 tweets under the hashtag I am for Ukraine. As Handribal Stiftung, the foundation of the Belgian party in German, no, the Green Party in Germany, and it's not very neutral because it's the most pro-war party in the Bundestag right now, actually. They were saying there was always war propaganda, but never like in this conflict before. This is being done, addressed to so many different audiences. I will leave it here so you will understand what we are swallowing day by day during this war. Yeah, a media war, definitely. So we'll have a break for 10 minutes and we'll see you after the break.
like I wish I'd stayed asleep today. I never thought this day would end. I never thought tonight could ever be this close to me. But if I had your faith, then I could make it safe and clean. If only I was sure that my head on the door was a dream.
From Greece, she had a thirst for knowledge. She studied sculpture at St. Martin's College. That's where I caught her eye. She told me that her dad was loaded. I said, in that case, I'll have a rum and Coca-Cola. She said, fine. And then, in 30 seconds' time, she said, I want to live like common people. I want to do whatever common people do. Want to sleep with common people. I want to sleep with common people like you. Oh, what else could I do? I said, I'll see what I can do. I took her to a supermarket. I don't know why, but I had to start it somewhere. So it started there. I said, pretend you got no money. But she just laughed and said, oh, you're so funny. I said, yeah. Well, I can't see anyone else smiling in here. Are you sure you want to live like common people? You want to see whatever common people see. You want to sleep with common people. You want to sleep with common people like me? But she didn't understand. She just smiled and held my hand. Rent a flat above a shop. Cut your hair and get a job. Smoke some fags and play some pool. Pretend you never went to school, but still you never get it right. 'Cause when you're laid in bed at night, watching roaches climb the wall, if you called your dad, he could stop it all, yeah. You'll never live like common people. You'll never do whatever common people do. You'll never feel like common people. You'll never watch your life slide out of view. And dance, drink, screw, 'cause there's nothing else to do. Like a dog lying in a corner, they will bite you and never warn you. Look out. They'll tear your inside out. Whoa. 'Cause everybody hates a tourist, especially the ones who think it's all such a laugh. Yeah. And the chip-stained grease will come out in the bath. You will never understand how it feels to live your life with no meaning nor control, and with nowhere left to go. You're amazed that they exist, and they burn so bright whilst you can only wonder why. Sing along with the common people, sing along and it might just get you through. Laugh along with the common people, laugh along even though they're laughing at you. And the stupid things that you do, 'cause you think that poor is cool. You'll never live like common people. You'll never do whatever common people do. You'll never feel like common people. You'll never watch your life slide out of you. And dance, drink, screw, 'cause there's nothing else to do. Sing along with the common people. Sing along and it might just get you through. Laugh along with the common people. Laugh along even though they're laughing at you. And the stupid things that you do, 'cause there's nothing else to do.
Love is blindness, I don't wanna see. Won't you wrap the night around me? Take my heart. Love is blindness. In a parked car, in a crowded street, you see your love made complete. Thread is ripping, the knot is slipping. Love is blindness. Love is clockworks and cold steel. Fingers too numb to feel. Squeeze the handle, blow out the candle. Love is blindness. Love is blindness, I don't wanna see. Won't you wrap the night around me? Oh my love, blindness. Oh little death without mourning, no call and no warning. Baby, a dangerous idea. It almost makes sense. Love is drowning in a deep well. All the secrets, no one to tell. Take the money, honey. Blindness. Love is blindness, I don't wanna see. Won't you wrap the night around me? Oh my love, blindness.
made it through the wilderness. Somehow I made it through. Didn't know how lost I was till I found you. I was beat, incomplete, I've been had. I was sad and blue, but you made me feel. Yes, you made me feel shiny and new, like a virgin. Hey! Touched for the very first time, like a virgin. Listen to your heartbeat, like a virgin. Ooh, like a virgin. Feels so good inside when you hold me and your heart beats and you love me. Oh, 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 whoa, whoa, whoa. Like a virgin.
I threw a wish in the well. Don't ask me, I'll never tell. I looked to you as it fell, but now you're in my way. I trade my soul for a wish, pennies and dimes for a kiss. I wasn't looking for this, but now you're in my way. Your stare was holding, ripped jeans, skin was showing. Hot night, wind was blowing. Where you think you're going, baby? Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. It's hard to look right at you, baby, but here's my number, so call me maybe. You took your time with the call, I took no time with the fall. You gave me nothing at all, but still you're in my way. I beg and borrow and steal at first sight, and it's real. I didn't know I would feel it, but it's in my way. Your stare was holding, ripped jeans, skin was showing. Hot night, wind was blowing. Where you think you're going, baby? Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. It's hard to look right at you, baby, but here's my number, so call me maybe. Hey, I just met you, and this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. And all the other girls may try to chase me, but here's my number, so call me maybe. Before you came into my life, I missed you so bad. So call me maybe. It's hard to look right at you, baby, but here's my number, so call me maybe. Before you came into my life, I missed you so bad. I missed you so bad. I missed you so, so bad. Before you came into my life, I missed you so bad, and you should know that. So call me maybe.
Slip inside the eye of your mind. Don't you know you might find a better place to play? You said that you'd never been, but all the things that you've seen, they slowly fade away. So I started a revolution from my bed.
Ahora, sí, ya está encès. Bueno, bona tarda.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Let's continue with this second panel. And I think Pablo is hearing the interpretation into English, I hope. Now we will be looking at the issue of security, but from a different perspective, from a much closer perspective to people, focused more on our cities. So just as an introduction, I'd like to say that in the previous panel we were talking of security and war. But those of us who are part of the movement for peace and working for peace, if there's one thing that is clear to us, is that peace isn't the absence of war. Being in peace doesn't mean there is no war. We can't say that in absence of war, society lives in peace. It's clear to us that we can't talk about peace as an absence of war, but rather that we have to talk about peace in positive terms, in terms of social justice. We have to talk about peace in the sense of enjoying our rights and being able to develop our full human capacities. That is the sense we give to the word peace. But generally speaking, when states talk of peace, they use completely different terms with elements that we all know, like in this war. If you want peace, prepare for war, invest in weapons, invest in technological developments for new weapons. But if today, earlier on, we were talking of how municipalities can work for peace, well then a question we could ask ourselves is, why should peace be discussed at a municipal level? Why should we include peace into the municipal agenda? Well, the reason seems quite logical to me. Right now, 65% of the world's population live in urban areas. They live in cities, and estimates for 2050 by UN tell us 85% of the global population will live in cities. So we can't say that peace is something just for states to deal with. Municipalities will be facing the great challenges for the existence of mankind and the problems that humans are faced with, and therefore municipalities must take action. We have to deal with climate change, we have to participate in energy transition, migration, racism, diversity, the many types of inequalities ravaging the world, corruption, crime rates. And quite often you think, well, municipalities maybe do not have competencies in any of these areas. Even if that is the case, it does not mean that municipalities are able to carry out policies or actions to reduce or wipe out these inequalities. In the previous panel we were talking of security in warfare terms. When we look at a local level though, there is another element which I think is relevant and something that we can change in our mindset. Generally speaking, when citizens talk of security, they often think that being safe means avoiding crime. And crime is something for the police to deal with. If before we said that the absence of war doesn't configure peace, we can also say that a lack of crime does not mean that society lives in security. There are many forms of violence that aren't classified as crime. Not having decent housing isn't a crime. Going hungry isn't considered a crime. Not having access to public health care or medicines isn't considered a crime. But they are forms of violence. And we cannot leave all issues relating to security in the hands of the police. Our challenge today, I think, is how we can build security, how we can build peaceful societies, how we can build human relations between humans that are safer without having guiding principles such as the police or crimes. We can take it further than that, and that is the challenge that we want to bring today here at this panel. How can we go beyond the police dimension of crimes, and how we can have look at security going beyond the police, and how we can change things in our municipalities. Usually when there are municipal elections and the winner of the elections decides which area they want to coordinate, Maria deals with security, or who deals with another department. They will say, well, I'll leave security in the hands of police because I don't know what to do. And I think what we want to say is that argument doesn't stand. We need an agenda for security, and we'll be sharing experiences this afternoon or this evening with several people working in the area of security. You all have the presentations online. You can read the CVs of those who are on this panel, so I'll just give a summary of their CVs to give you an understanding of where we come from. So in the interventions will go in the order they are sitting. First, we will hear from Ana Barrero, who is the president of the Spanish Association for Peace. She is also the president of AIPAZ, the Spanish Association of Investigation for Peace, and she's been promoting the local municipality forum for the construction of peace in territories. Then we will be hearing from Dago Guanel. I don't know if I've pronounced your name right. You are a researcher specializing in international relations, and your specialty are conflicts in Africa. Thirdly, we will be hearing from Carlos Freixa. He is a professor of anthropology at the Pompeu Fabra University, and I think among his most important works they focus on studying youth cultures in Catalonia, Mexico, Colombia, and he shares his research in several universities with youth groups and youth cultures, and how very often youth are embroiled in violence. The fourth panelist, who isn't here, was going to be the mayor of Palmira. It's a city in the Cauca Valley in Colombia. They were awarded the ULCG prize. The mayor unfortunately won't be able to connecting, but Daniela Reina will be connecting instead. She has worked with him, and she is coordinating international cooperation in the municipality. And last but not least, we will hear from Paulo Moraes, who's a lawyer, professor of constitutional law, and he's here not so much because of his academic experience, but out of his experience as a mediator. He was the Executive Secretary for Human Rights, and today he is the Executive Secretary for Citizen Security in Recife, Brazil, and he will be sharing with us their experience. So I would ask you to keep your presentations down to 10 minutes each, perhaps, so that we can then have interventions from the floor. Anna, the floor is yours. Thanks so much, Tika, for that introduction and for your wonderful presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for being here, for those of you who are here physically in the room and for those who are following us online. Firstly, I'd like to thank Centre Delàs de Estudis per la Pau and friends from Centre Delàs for inviting me to take part in this conference for the year 2022 on another security is possible and urgent. And I'd also like to thank the other organizers of this conference, Institut de Drets de Catalonia and the International Peace Bureau. Okay, so from the Spanish Association for Research in Peace, which brings together NGOs and university institutes and individuals who do research and education for peace from around Spain, we believe and we say and we are convinced that people deserve having peace as one of their main goals, as a sign of identity of municipalities. The mayor of Granollers, Josep Mayoral, who's ending his mandate this year, says time and time again that city councils usually ask for an environmental assessment when there's any construction works going back on, and we should also ask for peace assessment in the municipalities, and we couldn't agree more with his words, because towns and cities are where we live, where we coexist with others, where we sometimes fall ill, where we have social relations, and our everyday lives are linked to cities and towns. And cities and towns must be able to welcome us in our full diversity with our difference. They must care for our needs and must take care of us. So cities should create the conditions for human security and peaceful coexistence. What does this mean? Well, it means that cities and towns need to come up with actions and policies to prevent and significantly reduce or eradicate any forms of violence that may deteriorate or threaten life individually or collectively, whether it's direct violence, structural violence, cultural violence, or symbolical violence, as well as environmental violence. And cities and towns must come up with spaces and mechanisms for dialogue and agreement to overcome conflicts in a peaceful manner. And since the year 2017, IPATH has been leading a process of municipalism and peace linked to the World Forum on Urban Conflicts and Coexistence for Peace, which was held in Madrid under the auspices of the mayor at the time, Manuela Carmena, together with the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, and the mayor of Barcelona, Ada Colau. In this municipalism, what we say it's important to include peace and coexistence in the agenda of municipalities, and that peace building must be cross-cutting in all areas and all departments. It can't be something that is done in a silo where you have a department on peace and coexistence. It has to be worked in all departments, and we need transformative policies to be put in place that will favor social cohesion and coexistence and the enjoyment of human rights and citizenship rights. So towns and cities need to develop policies for peace. And for this municipalism for peace to be possible, we need new forms of governance, different ways of governance for peace. We need forms of governance that redefine the concept of security. This governance must focus on care. Professor Josep Vicente Martín Guzmán said that security comes from the Latin word sine cura, which means without care. Security has to be focused on care to ensure full enjoyment of decent living conditions so that people can exercise their rights as citizens. So this governance must promote these new forms of security, this redefined security, because life in cities must and has to happen in safe environments. As Tika was saying, but this security or this safety has to be based on human needs. We need a human security that depends on access to food, access to drinking water, access to healthcare, public healthcare and public education. access to a decent wage for life in dignity, good governance. We need the security to look at the protection of people. So this governance must be decoupled from violence. It has to be committed to reach agreements and foster mediation, and it must deal with inequalities. It has to foster care policies and must also be in favor of sustainable development, including the attempts to leave no one behind. In this forum I mentioned before, which was held in 2017, the first was, the second was held in 2018, and last year 2021 the third forum was held during the pandemic. There were 2 years without in-person forums. In this third forum, which was in Mexico, in all of these forums between mayors of technicians, civil society and academics, they all stressed how important and necessary it is to build peace and coexistence in municipalities and to create a municipalism for peace. This forum said that we had to commit to an agenda for peace and coexistence. So, picking up this commitment from IPATH and the Mayors for Peace network, in 2019 we came up with a proposal for an agenda for peace and coexistence, which was finalized this year in 2022 with the participation of Tika Fund. So this is the handbook that was written to help draft an agenda for peace and coexistence. It was developed by IPATHI de Mospath, the Institute of the Autonomous University, with the support from UNDP. And the goal behind this handbook is for municipalities to have a tool that will allow them to develop and implement municipal public policies and also municipal budgets that are geared towards preventing, eliminating or significantly reducing all forms of violence, and for these policies to be coherent with the principles of sustainable development, human rights, gender equality and the protection of the environment. This agenda was developed within the framework of the 2030 agenda. It's cross-cutting to all the 17 SDGs, though more specifically it contributes to SDG 16 on peaceful and inclusive citizens. Just as peace is cross-cutting to all SDGs, the agenda is too. It's related to the new urban agenda, to the global charter for the right to the city, and with the Paris agreements, and of course it's linked to other global agendas such as the feminist agenda or the environmentalist agenda. What is this local agenda for peace and coexistence aiming for? Well, it wants to build communities, people, cities and territories that embrace a culture of peace, to exclude violence as a tool to overcome conflict, that we should use dialogue and mediation, so that justice is based on human rights, and to strengthen institutions so that they are trustworthy and stable for citizens. This agenda also contributes to building positive peace and it's cross-cutting to all departments of city councils. What we say is that we don't need to do more, but just that different departments must work closer hand in hand in a network with society and with civil society organizations. And in the 3 minutes left, I'd like to quickly go through this agenda for peace and coexistence. It has several stages. The first is coming up with a diagnosis on conflicts and peace in the territories. It has two goals. One of the goals is to identify the different forms of violence and the extent of this violence and the underlying causes, but also to identify of peace. There are many initiatives, activities and projects that are being promoted from city councils as well as from citizens and civil society that are building peace, and it's important to identify them because those that work must be kept and must be supported. The second stage is a local action plan for peace building, which is based on, once you have a diagnosis, to identify the violence, the forms of violence, causes and extensions, then the action plan comes up with recommendations. So based on the recommendations of the diagnosis, the plan of action is to prioritize and set a timeline for resources, programs and policies to reduce, deal with and eradicate the different forms of violence that have been identified in the initial diagnosis. And the third stage is a planning and follow-up. You set up a monitoring committee, you have a roadmap, and you have to monitor the implementation of the plan regularly, as well as promote a system of indicators so that each municipality creates its own indicators to measure and monitor peace and coexistence in the municipality. And then there's a final fourth stage, which is the final evaluation. We have this final evaluation of the process. So there are 4 key elements in the agenda. That is the participation. The agenda has to be developed in a participatory manner in all its steps from the start, ever since the diagnostic is done, as well as the plan of action and the assessment. You must include citizens and civil society, otherwise it wouldn't be feasible. It needs to have a strong gender perspective throughout the process. There has to be a culture for peace. If we're building agendas for peace, a culture for peace must be a cross-cutting axis. And the resources are also important. City councils develop plans and programs for human rights, equality, but then they don't have the resources to fund these programs, and these plans are never implemented, so resources are needed. And to conclude, I'd just like to say that people and institutions have the ability to make peace, that city councils, it's in the hands of city councils to build peace in their municipalities through policies and budgets that are geared towards education, mediation, cooperation, democracy, transparency, and defending human rights and care, and that citizens, together with city councils, hold the responsibility and are called upon to work together for peace, understanding peace as a collective desire. That's all. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. First thing, I'd like to apologize because I promised my friends from Unipau that the next time I would come to Catalonia, I would say a few sentences in Catalan. I didn't imagine I would be coming back so soon. My name is David Llistar. I'm not in peace studies nor human rights studies. I am the black sheep in this flock, and I'm going to speak about the conflicts, which is what I study. I will talk about a conflict strategy, about the failure of the militarization of the Sahel region. But before starting, I would like us to take a few seconds of silence for a person for whom I had big respect and who left our world to go to the other one, Mika Munda. Just a few seconds, thank you. Thank you. For those who don't know much or anything about Sahel or haven't heard about it, Sahel is a semi-desert band crossing the whole of the African continent from the west to the east or east to the west, depending on where you are, from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, with an extension of 5,400 kilometers approximately, crossing a series of countries. And I will go quickly here because I don't have that much time. It's a broad area, and I'm going to reduce it to a few countries. These 3 countries, this is an area in the African continent. It's usually called the region of the 3 borders. And I spoke about this on IPAO a few months ago. This part of Africa is affected by different phenomena. And it is known. Where do I have to point? It is generally associated to migration, terrorism. So generally speaking, when dinghies come, this is an area that is interesting in terms of conflicts, and there is an important deployment there that started from a very localized conflict as a consequence of a small mistake made by Westerners, which was to transform Libya into a failed state. Then some groups came down to Mali. They wanted to have their own state. Some terrorists went in there, and from then on, we don't know how, the situation has been degrading further and further. Where should I point? Here. This area has generally a young population, and economically it's not a big party. There's a lot of poverty, and the currency used in these 3 countries constituting this area is the franco CFA, which is a currency, I don't know if you heard of it. It's printed in France, and for that reason the 14 African countries need to give half of their GDP to French treasury. You know, this is what's happening here. At the political level, the area was shaken since 1966 by 3 coups. And there was number 14 in Burkina Faso recently, which was a coup within a coup. I don't know if I should count 13 or 14. It would be 13 and a half, maybe. Rebel movements, independentist movements, terrorist Islamist movements, but like really bad. We have it really, really bad, not like in other parts of the world. These are really, really bad ones. Climate change as well being manifested through droughts and floods. As I was saying, there's an external intervention, a foreign intervention, especially in Mali, where it was first the French who came after 2013, then Sebal, Mudabo, and they went into Niger. There's an African force, G5 Sahel, an European force called Task Force Takuba. North Americans are there with AFRICOM, and our friends from Wagner. They don't know, we don't know exactly what they're doing, and the United Nations were trying to maintain peace. So the intervention, the military intervention in the African continent, as you can see, is big. It's the main, it's France with 103 interventions directly in order to bring down a government or to support a government. But in 103 occasions, the French have intervened militarily in the continent. What are the results, the specific results of this military relation of Sahel with the Europeans, North Americans? What are the results and the consequences of this? This is the situation of the number of incidents related with terrorist groups in 2005. In 2013, this was the situation where the Europeans started to intervene. In 2020, this is the situation. So the big question is, what is happening? Why is the situation becoming worse? In our countries, there were different social movements from which governments were thrown out. And we can see the military here. I don't want to give them an ugly face because sometimes they're nice people, right? Anyway. So the social movements were asking international forces to leave. United States and the United Nations didn't understand. We are there to help. What's wrong? And I only have 15 minutes only, and this is not a long time. I usually like to speak further. In the first place, the first failure was not listening. They didn't bear in mind the social and historic realities of these countries. They just went in there. We throw a few bombs. We make them scared. We scare them away and they will flee. Well, yeah, maybe they will flee. Well, they will come back stronger because the root of those problems were not addressed and were not taken into account. What I'm trying to do here is a summary. Through the use of military forces, what is forgotten or what is discarded is the possibility of facing the real roots of the problems known in the region: corruption, regional disparities, social injustice, false democracy. Because this democracy is only a facade democracy, it's not real democracy. Sending foreign forces to defend this kind of regimes can be understood on the one hand as a tremendous struggle to defend a system that is itself bad. As it was well said in the first presentation by Tika, the peace is not the absence of war. That is just a negative peace. Positive peace is where, besides not having a conflict, people can live well. And military solution can only implement a negative peace. Because not tackling the problems in the region, people will keep on suffering and they will always find ways of expressing themselves in a way that is not the most peaceful one. Implementing a military response makes me think of when Jesus said, if one hits you on one cheek, you should turn the other cheek. I'm sure people started laughing when he said that. Nobody will think of showing their the other cheek when you receive a blow or a slap on your face. So immediate response to a military or armed attack is automatically a reaction of an armed attack, a counter-attack, military attack. So we must understand that the easiest way might be to counter-attack, but that's not a true solution to the problems in the Sahel region, as I was saying at the beginning. I don't come from peace building or peace culture background. or a human rights background. But I wanted to share my microcosmos with you so that you will know how violence in the region might have to do with the militarization as an attempted solution to certain problems that had nothing to do with this in the beginning. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to now start talk about young gangs, armed gangs in Barcelona. It might seem like a different subject altogether, but I think we will find some common ground between both presentations, I believe. I'll go straight to the point. Last week, while I found myself in Sinaloa, the capital city of the Culiacan cartel, in Culiacan, the drug cartel, I read this interview with the El Salvador First Minister where he said the war against gangs is a just war, which was bringing us back to the origins of colonial policies and religions about crusades, jihad. This is the philosophy and behind these actions. Whoever has lived in El Salvador has probably seen what it means that more than 80,000 youth have been arrested without any trials, with only prisoners with only meal a day, forced disappearances, concentration camps in terrible conditions, and deaths, because 6 months have gone by since the state of exception was declared, the state of alert was declared. But I'm not going to talk about El Salvador, because ISIP has invited a great expert in it, Juan Martinez, to speak about it, and he precisely was exiled because of the persecution that he was suffering, because he was researching violence, not justifying it. I'm going to focus on youth gangs here in Barcelona, but I would like to remind us that the number of deaths in this death against youth gangs or between youth gangs is higher than the number of deaths in the Ukraine war. And this is some piece of data that we should all bear in mind, I think. I will go quickly. In this process of war and peace, as it has been said, peace is not just the absence of war, but like in every urban conflict, like Leon Tolstoy reminds us in War and Peace, there comes a point where we need to know how to wait, and the source of joy is not outside but within us, as Tolstoy said. In the days of youth gangs, the story started 22 years ago when a migratory process coming from Latin America arrived for family regroupment, and many young teenagers came to join their mothers. And after a while, there was this war against the gangs, this fear of the unknown. Fear of gangs is a reality. According to Jimenez Los Santos, there was a comparison between the gangs and terrorism, which is the version we had of violence. So it was turning a musical band into a criminal gang, according to the periodico Catalunya in 2005, in this vignette or this comic illustration. The first war started in 2003 and it went on until 2005 in the context of the generation called 1.5. This was young people, teenagers and young people coming with family grouping to be regrouped with their mothers or parents, and the only thing they could do was to meet up with other youngsters of their age, and they formed the Latin Kings and the Nietas, and the trigger for this was the death of Ronnie Tapias. The stigma was created after a while. So these two gangs were coming from allegedly Ecuador. The Latin Kings were born in Chicago, and because of the deportation policies, they arrived in Spain. And the Nietas, which were born in Puerto Rico, but which were also raised, they were also grew in the United States. Latin Kings is symbolized by the crown, and the Nietas, which have a heart. The Latin Kings turned around as to declare the war against them because of the murder of their member. In the second stage of this war, this was a stage 2, 2005 to 2009, with the research in charge of Jovlat and the action by the Barcelona City King, the police, the Catalan police, Fede Latina, and the Roquetes Young Youth Center, where there was a project including a musical project called United by the Flow. And as a milestone, there was a constitution of two different organizations, a cultural organization of Reyes and Reinas, Kings and Queens, Latinos on Catalonia in August 2006, and the Socio-Cultural Association, Sports and Families Association. And this considerably reduced the violence according to the police. In 2010, World War II meant that the crisis threw a lot of these young people into unemployment, which made a lot of them have to travel back to the countries. And there was a reform of the criminal code in Catalonia, according to which new crime figures were created, and they were massively applied to this kind of gangs, but not applied to neo-Nazi groups, strangely enough. Most of these gangs were just teenagers who were trying to find an identity of their own. The new war found Latin Kings and Nietas a bit more calm down, but there were new groups such as Black Panthers or Saving the Trout coming from El Salvador. There was a second attempt of peace from a second European project, UGANG, including actions in coalition with the Geneva University in Italy, coming from a seminar in the situation of Latin gangs in Milan, which had a lot of parallelisms with the situation here. And 15M was a big youth mobilization, but the migrant youth was not involved in this movement. There was a film that were shot by us in L'Hospitalet district in Barcelona, which is called Looking for Respect, and which was talking about the situation. In 2014, the context was different. It was a context of Islamophobia. There were young people from all nationalities, but North African young people started to create their own groups and wanting to imitate those groups. And in Lleida, the combination of two gangs from the 80s, the Spanish gangs, which was a combination of two gangs. They ended up being called street wolves. There were the Spanish police that took them to jail, and there was a strong criminalization process against them. There was an attempt for peace. One of them was left in free, and they came to see me with a girlfriend, and there was a project. After the Arab Spring in Morocco and Algeria and Lebanon, we collaborated with them, where they came up with a video to defend themselves after the stigma that had been created. And they were saying, some of us are just bike robbers, but we are not a criminal organization. Fourth war, that's a Latinophobia. There was a change in the management of the Catalan police, where war against the Latin gangs was declared, and even the legal sector involved a massive raid with the accusation of drug trafficking, and it was in the media. The Latin Kings leaders whom I had interviewed was arrested in that macro raid. Peace attempts was difficult because there was a phobia and a total an atmosphere that was totally opposed to them. Only some association related to Latin Kings or some lawyer from Iridia was trying to help them and defend those who felt innocent. As you can see, the news in all the media in prime time, you could read about the arrest of 30 alleged Latin Kings by the Catalan police. The fifth war was in 2017, and in this case, it happened in Madrid. In Catalonia, for 5 years, we had applied inclusive policies which worked and I would like to defend them. But in Madrid, from 2017 until now, there has been more than 12 murders linked to these groups, and was with just one response by the police, with a trigger which was a street fight in the Plaza del Sol, and the famous square in Madrid. And the two gangs that were fighting each other were DDP and Trinitarios. But when it was published in the newspaper that the Trinitarios leader was from the Dominican Republic, the embassy called to deny that because it was a misunderstanding. There's a piece of research that I'm leading called Transgang, where we're trying to carry out mediation workshops with youngsters from these gangs, as well as youngsters from Latin Kings and other gangs. There was a late effect of that criminalizing campaign in 2020. This macro raid of 300 Catalan police and 30 detainees and arrested led to nothing. There were only a couple of them who had trafficked with small amounts of hashish, but the rest of them could not be condemned because there was no evidence against them. And Metropolitan was the only media that spoke about this, no other media. It was the only place where we could read the Latin Kings won the big battle. And after 15 years of interviews that I conducted with the king of the Latin Kings, or the leader of the Latin Kings, I was able to inform also about their views. In the Sixth War, 2021, there was a big change because there were firearms. So instead of, as opposed to just cold steel, there was a xenophobic movement arising against them in the fire riot in Madrid, where people were saying they didn't want any Latin gangs, or menas, which were non-accompanied minors coming from other countries. And this led to a politicization of society. A project in the Raval district of Barcelona was aimed at accompanying minors from Morocco who were working with educators here and there, with a process of visibilization and co-mediation which involved replacing xenophobia and replacing it for xenophilia. The seventh war meant more than 7 killings in these gangs, most of them in Madrid, where there's still a war between Trinitarios and Dominican don't play. There is the Dominican mafia linked to mafias, and that cannot be denied, and this is also present in Raval in Barcelona. But the teenagers are not part of this mafia. Some of them are adults that are being manipulated. The fear of machetes in this case. But then there was also against the police, and also in Valencia and Sevilla. Some of these gangs were looking for snob. They want to come. They want to be a part of that gang in order to attack rich young guys. That's their target. The plan against the gangs by the government did not work, because the only solution they were trying to give was a police-centered solution, and it just didn't work. We were invited to the commission in the Spanish assembly about these issues, and we're trying to do that in the parliament as well. We're trying to give our opinion in parliament, and we haven't been granted these wishes yet. My conclusions have to do with gangs, not only victims, but as killers and murderers. Gangs are Casus Belli, gangs as Vispacem, gangs as a symptom of physical juvenicide. The change from 2000 to 2022, I don't have time to explain this in detail, from recently arrived groups to already established groups, from teenage membership to heterogeneous membership, from a strong structure to a more regional anarchic structure, from a public exhibition and to invisibility right now. Epilogue. We started with El Salvador. What has been the solution taken by Madrid? Well, go to El Salvador to ask. That's the Ayuso government is asking the El Salvador police for help and advice. Epilogue 2, to criminal bands, to musical bands. This is the collective in Novarris, united by the flow in El Salvador. A lot of the girls who were imprisoned from these girls coming from these gangs, created an ensemble of violins with the help of trans gang, but the protagonists of this story need to hide, because even if they're enjoying their freedom and they're totally inserted in society, the police is looking for them to bring them back into jail, even if they have not committed any further crimes. This is what's happening with these girls, and also with young people who are now in evangelical churches and who haven't committed any crime for a long time, but because they are in the police lists, they are being seek and sought by the police. Thank you very much. This is our details in case you want to get in touch with us.
Okay, so before giving Pablo the floor, we will be giving the floor to Daniela Reina, who's joining us online from the municipality of Palmira in the Cauca Valley in Colombia. Is her connection ready? When you like, Daniela, the floor is yours. Sorry, do you want me to share your slides from here? If you want, you can just signal to me and I'll move through the slides. Okay. Apologies, the sound quality is
A ver, ¿se oye bien?
Let's see if we can hear you better now. Sometimes this happens. Hello, can you try me? Can you hear me now? Now we can hear you better, it seems. Just give me a second. I don't need to get your slides up. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I am Isabella Reina. I am in the International Cooperation Department in the City Council of Palmira, and I'm also working to prevent violence in the city of Palmira. I want to tell you today that I want to give you some background on the city of Palmira, and I want to then share how from a municipal level we've been working to prevent violence. As previous speakers have said, the city councils act as the face of citizens, and we have to bring down crime rates. It's high on our agenda, and that's what I want to share with you today. I want to say that Palmira is on the Pacific coast of Colombia, and this is relevant because it is a geostrategic area, and our geographical position has allowed us to have free trade areas, industrial estates, a port that gives on to the Pacific, but this strategic location of Palmira is also beneficial to drug trafficking and armed groups. So our geographical location has perpetuated the inequalities and the violence used by drug traffickers. Another important background is that after the peace accords, after a 50-year-long internal armed conflict, we are trying to overcome the structural causes of the conflict, which was predominantly rural. In urban environments, violence and the displacement of armed conflict actors to urban areas is something that is being dealt with by the government, and it's a very pressing issue here in the city of Palmira. It's not an easy job because, as I was saying, 74% of the coke plantations are in the area, and a fourth of them are within the vicinity of Palmira, so the Cauca Valley is a conflictual area. And in this context, in 2011, Palmira had a peak of more than 97.1% of 97.1 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants. And we realized that the rates of murders in the city was high above that in the capital city. They said Palmira was amongst one of the 50 most dangerous cities in the world, and this led to studies. And then when we made it to government, we saw there are two criteria we could use to identify violence in Palmira. It doesn't affect all the city, it affects especially certain parts of the city, so we were able to identify hotspots where there were higher crime indicators. Also that it wasn't the whole population that was a victim of murders, but it was affected especially youths aged between 16 and 29. And we also saw that the main assassins were also youths. And this was linked to stigma and illiteracy. So our strategy tries dealing with both things at the same time. We emphasize those hotspots where there are greater violence. We want to provide support to families, and we target this specific age group. And these were the 2 points we identified. It's cross-cutting, but we have a shared strategy. Apologies, sorry Daniela for interrupting. So to come up with a methodology to overcome the obstacles. In the first intervention we were trying to have a monthly payment, which allowed us to come up with this methodology, and without any doubts that helped us in bringing down crime rates, murder rates considerably. This tool is something we adapted from the National Strategy for Demilitarization and Reinsertion, obviously adapted to a much smaller context at a local level, targeting a specific age group. And with this we wanted to get these youths to stick to the plan, and that is what is happening. For instance, this morning I was telling the attendees of the morning session with experts and other mayors from Catalonia that we have an impact assessment where we can see, funded by the Open Society Foundations, which shows that there is a close correlation between the program, the adaptation of this national reinsertion plan to the local level, and the reduction in the number of murders in the city. Between August 21 and 2024, 4 of the 21 fewer cases, 4 are directly linked to this program. For the prevention, we also have different strategies to stop the young siblings of youth who are in gangs to join these gangs as a life project. And then we have another component to create safe environments or safe spaces. We want to avoid the environments to be co-opted by violence. We want to reform them through projects of urban art, sports, cinema, arts in general. These are different tools that we can do so that the community takes ownership of these spaces that were before full of violence. And all of this strategy led us to the UCLG Peace Award last October, together with Arrecife, and we have Pablo with you. You have Pablo with you. We realized that we are not alone in building peace at the municipal level. And we also realized that having the different components that I mentioned before allows us to have a comprehensive view of the issue, because it's very complex and requires complex solutions, and for that we were awarded another prize. And one thing that I think is key when developing strategies to prevent violence, you need a strong political will. So here we are coming up with an alternative to the way in which the issue has been dealt with traditionally in Colombia. Usually violence and crime has been dealt with through coercive measures in a highly militarized way and a securitized ways. And here we're trying to deal with the causes and not just the symptoms of this situation. We think it's important to be able to expand this in other cities and municipalities, because with the resources and the structured program, we want to use resources for two purposes. For instance, I can hire these youth who before would have been in gangs to do the rubbish collection services, for instance. So I'm using those resources for two different purposes. Amongst our allies, we have the Fundación Barcelona, business associations. We have more than 300 enterprises that are funding us and supporting us. We also have the global initiatives against transnational organized crime, which has helped us, and then different UN agencies that have allowed us not only to have technical and financial resources, but also to give this initiative a greater visibility. So that is what I wanted to share with you. It's a taste for what we're looking to do in Colombia at a national level. Now we have a left-wing national government, the first in recent history in Colombia. So we intend to replicate this methodology and all of the lessons learned and take them to a national level and hopefully an international level. And that is why it's so important that we are given the occasion to participate in this session today, to exchange ideas and to come up with new ideas as well. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Now we will give the floor to Paulo Moraes from Brazil. Thank you so much. Good evening. I'll be speaking in English because my Portuñol is terrible. I mix it all together. But I promise that next time I will speak in Spanish.
From Centre Delàs, I would like to thank in the name of IOA for the way that you treated me during all this process to come here and to talk with you about the Compais experience, which is the one that the UCLG chose as one of the 5 finalists on Peace Prize Award. So we are very happy to be here to present you our work and also our approach on peace culture and human rights issues. This is our city, Recife. Many of you may know Recife from its beaches and beauty, but we are, as many other cities in Latin America, based on this contradiction, on this violence. Our landscape is a violence itself. So we had to deal with these issues when we became, we entered the City Hall of Recife. In 2013, we were one of the most violent cities in Brazil. Actually, the most violent capital city in Brazil. And then we had to face all these bad homicide rates and violence rates, and we had to deal with all this lack of infrastructure, lack of public policies, which is a mark, unfortunately, in Brazil, that we have some lacks on public policies. Then we created, we had the idea to, inspired by the Latin American approach on citizenship security, which is those that deals not only with police enforcement or not only with safety itself, but the idea that people have to have their rights respected at the same, the whole human rights at the same time, included the security. So we had this very, active network of institutions, and we together made a lot of meetings, we had a lot of discussions to create a law to enforce the City Hall, the public administration of the city, to have a public policy on peace culture. We understand at the time that the laws in Brazil is something that people, like. Sometimes they don't even respect, but it's something that is more, is the way that we have to do to achieve some points of our in the public administration. So this law made it started to transform the public administration of our city, creating new skills and some topics for the departments, different departments to work with. And then we started to transform all the public administration to try to have the agenda on peace, on human rights issues, for the whole, not only for the human rights department, but for the whole city, for the whole public administration. We have this idea that we have to that these remarks from UNESCO should prevail on these discussions, on this approach. So peace is not only, as many of my colleagues have said, it's not only to not have wars, but it's all these pillars, all these issues respected and guaranteed. So we could work on this agenda, and during these discussions and during the whole strategy to try to promote peace and human rights, we created the COMPAIS. That's the point that I want to reach with you. COMPAIS is our community peace center are spaces, big compounds, created, designed to deliver public policies. We have 13 departments, different departments on it, working together to try to give citizenship, to deliver citizenship in very poor areas and violent areas of our city. Most of them that have never had some kind of, many of them have never had some kind of office department, or they have bad schools, they have bad health care centers. So it was some kind of transformation to deliver the whole City Hall to these areas, and trying to create this dialogue, to create this agenda with the community, with the people from there, that we had to discuss peace. We have to try to deliver not only the public services, but transform in the process what we are trying to do right now. So we had, on the beginning of this experience, we had to discuss with population, with people from neighborhoods, where the COMPAIS is working, how to work with them, which services we are going to work on there. And then we had all these kind of transformations coming from them, because they want more, they want to discuss more, they started to give us ideas. So it was a very collective way, the transformation that we started to do on these neighborhoods. And then we try also to give to the priority to children and younger. So we have this very specific way to work with them in sports, in education, with culture, with all the services for family, but the focus is on youngers and children, because they are going to change the world, they are the future. So we started to work with them and then invite the whole family to come together and work with us and take care of them. Because if they are here with us and in one of our 4 compis, they are safe, they are protected, they are not on the streets in a way to, you know, be victim or to be involved with gangs, with death squads, in criminality in general. So we built up a safe space to protect children and to have them with us, trying to discuss with them their future, their skills, and trying to improve it, and making things better for their lives, and trying to, you know, build with them, not for them, but build with them. So these centers are, as I said, with 13 different city departments working on it. We called a hub of public policies. Many of them works only on the city center, but now they are working in one of these 4 communities. And then we discussed with the teams that are working on it that we have to have this peace approach, to have to discuss in each and every program. We have there, for example, conflict mediation. So we have to work with children about conflict mediation, because it's important to start to do this on schools, on the streets. So each and every program who works there have also this agenda to discuss with and to deliver some kind of discussion regarding human rights and peace culture. So we have now more than 50,000 people who have activities, daily basis activities on it, on one of the 4 compis that are already working on it. We have also this plan to expand the network with 4 more compis until 2004. We are now building 2 more, and they became a landmark of our city, of this approach on peace culture and in human rights issues, because it's something that it's real. It's not the discussion itself. It's working together with these communities, with these neighborhoods, and to try to change their minds, because they are used to have relations only on violence basis. So we are trying to create with them different approaches, different forms of relationships, of how to deal at home with their families and so on. So we had these very good results from the early 2001. We had this decrease on violence rates, and mainly the homicides rates on the surroundings of the first and the second compis of 5.8 and 13.8 less homicides. So we have these studies that deliver us some good news about the results that we are gaining, because people the homicide rates are decreasing, people are having new activities, their families report us that they are fighting less at school, fighting less on the streets, they are, you know, getting some other skills, some other things to do. And so that's it, some pictures of our work, and I'm ready for your answers. Thank you very much for your questions.
Tenemos unos minutos por si queréis.
So we have a couple of minutes left in case anyone wants to ask a question, a comment, or share a thought. I see one hand raised. I have a very concrete question for Ana Barrero with regards to the peace policies in the cities. How will you be combining the Charter on the rights to the city with the plan? I mean, when you or governing with a human rights-based approach, this is very useful to build peace, because you are responding to the needs that Dicafon was referring to. I sometimes wonder, you have all of these plans and handbooks and documents, but very often in what you need to implement this is political will. So my question is, what is your proposal to combine the Charter to the Rights of the City, knowing that so many Catalan municipalities have signed up to this, and this proposal that you've mentioned? I'd like to know if you can tell us whether you're working to raise awareness amongst political representatives, because truly with no political will of our decision makers, you can come up with many plans and documents, but the situation won't improve. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. We'll take a few more questions before answering. Hi, I also have a question for Ana Barrero. I have two proposals with regards to the network that you were mentioning. Bringing in the proposals that are made by several associations to promote peace and to educate in peace. Many organizations and city councils are calling for the armies to get out of certain trade fairs in Barcelona, like Expo Jove, in Girona, Valls, Madrid, Valencia. And there is a situation where, city halls know this, they have these trade fairs where the army has a stand in educational trade fairs, when if a city is defending peace, they shouldn't encourage children to join the army. There are many difficulties for city councils, who very often receive or are owners of the spaces where the trade fairs are. Very often they can't cancel the participation of the army. That's one thing. And the other thing is that they are calling for armed police to be banned from entering educational centers when they go to give trainings on road laws. There's a project to demilitarize education, which is a campaign where you have student unions and teachers unions and organizations promoting peace have come together to suggest that other people and associations give these trainings and not police officers, and a lot less police officers who are armed.
Otra pregunta, espera.
I'd like to ask Carles Freixa if he could explain better what the concept of gangs means and the sense of physical and moral the involvement. From your experience, I would like to ask you, internationally and locally, for both Yahoo and for those of you who are working more locally, the evidence tells us that we're building safety in a much deeper and comprehensive way than from a police perspective, or in the case of the a military perspective. What is stopping us as a society to really push for these initiatives that you have been explaining? What is stopping, and this will be the last two questions. Should we follow the order in which we intervene? That will be more orderly. Maybe you can start, Anna, then. So, to answer those who were asking these interesting questions. And I want to thank you for your interesting questions, by the way. The agenda, Tika might be able to complement me here, has been done including all these documents. This is why it has been done in the 2030 agenda framework, and bear in mind the chart that was signed. This is all included with a human rights approach, a gender perspective, and also looking at the environmentalist agenda, the ecologist agenda, which is done to contribute to these documents that are already existing, and for its contribution to contribute to their implementation, and for city councils to implement them as their own working agenda in the municipality. So this would be the answer to that question. It's not about one global agenda, but the idea is that each municipality will have their own agenda. They will have their own action plan. Each municipality will establish their priorities. And I think our experiences here, we're acting on a specific problem with very diverse actions. And the question is that each municipality should define their priority about which problem they want to act on, bearing in mind all these actions. And we are starting from the basis that every municipality has an environmental agenda, a gender agenda, a culture agenda. And so the question is, why don't they have a peace agenda? And we're not saying that this should be a new charge. Many times the actions that are already taking place can already be a part of that agenda. However, there could be problems that might require an agenda to be elaborated. We've seen examples today that illustrate that this agenda needs to be consensuated and agreed with the civil society. It can be an action from a city council. This should be cross-cutting. This is what the agenda should look like. This is what we're trying to say the agenda should look like. Hello? To answer Ainoa's question, I would identify 3 things to help the cycle continue. The first thing would be to make it, how easy it is to follow violence. Investing in other kinds of solutions requires more time, it's more complicated, and this is why it doesn't seem so easy. Second point has to do with the first one. It's about short term. When the French arrived in 2013, in 2 weeks they had a victory, with a victory over the Taliban, but 20 years later the Taliban are still there, so these victories in the short term are stopping us from thinking in the long term. And the third point would be the bird effect. When the gangs started to be arrested, gang members started to be arrested, this was giving the illusion that something was being done, while deep down nothing was being done. So these would be the 3 points that I am identifying as the cause for the system that is highly limited to be continued. Thank you. What is impeding us to develop this agenda? Well, I agree with my 2 colleagues. There is a punitive side, making it difficult for someone to dare present an alternative, because punishment is easier than prevention always. Secondly, the lack of visibility of experiences that have worked. absolute visibility and first page news seem to be the only thing existing. However, there is evidence that there have been constructive experiences which have been able to leave violence on the side. Third, the new generation of politicians don't want to run any risks. Both right-wing and left-wing parties, especially left-wing parties. 15 years ago we had politicians who were ready to run risks, but not anymore, not any longer. For example, the City Council of Barcelona didn't want to collaborate in our last project because this was a touchy issue. They wouldn't win them any medals that they could hang on themselves. About the questions of juvenicide, moral and physical juvenicide, this has a long history. It comes from the Ciudad Juárez feminicide and the victimization of young women, but also in Mexico, Colombia, and other countries in Latin America. For a long time, there has been systematic extermination and desperation of young youth gangs, with two emblematic cases. Ayotzinapa in Mexico and Falsos Positivos in Chile. In a group of research that I'm a part of, we have been reconstructing this feminicide and these forced disparitions, and we have named this the moral dimension of the research, because it's not just a physical extermination that should be taken into account, but it's also the systematic social exclusion of the youth. And this is not only happening in Latin America, it's also happening in the poor neighborhoods here, where the youth is now increasingly committing suicide. And this has become the first cause of death, suicide among the young people, where life has less and less value. The gangs could be the symptom of this homicide, because they are posing a risk. The young people want to become a member of a gang because it's a kind of a risky business. It's like an activity of risk that they are seeking for, but they are also looking for someone who will look after them, someone to take care of them. If their families are not looking after them, if there is no job that they can do, well, that's the group. It's a group where they look after each other. Sometimes they die, but they also look after each other.
But I think in our case in Brazil, we have to change our institutions. So since we left the last dictatorship in '85, we made some efforts to try to create the transitional justice, to try to improve our democracy. So we saw what we lived in the last 4 years. So the democracy in Brazil, it's not strong enough, and I think institutions reflect this. So they are not prepared for experiences that comes from other spaces that are not only for the police enforcement and the police officers and so on. So I think for these immature institutions, and also for our lack of democratization, we haven't had this we have a lot of initiatives in Brazil, but they are also, as you said, the second place in with low profile, with no budget. So it's something that we have to. These experiences, I came from when in Recife. It started in 2013, and we have re-election of the mayor. We have now a new mayor, and they are continuing. So this is very unusual in Brazil. Every elections, the new mayor, the new governor try to recreate everything, to have their brand, to have their name on it. So things are not going in long terms, only in shortcuts with very weak public policies. So I think it's the whole system have to change to have space for some initiatives that will address some innovative and some security, as we discuss it here, how should be. Thanks.
Bueno, pues moltes gràcies. Sí, diga. Sí,
sí,
Anna.
bueno,
Sí.
era simplemente pensaba que estabas...
The clear goal of the agenda is that there will be a tool for the prevention of different types of violences. How to tackle those kinds of violences. There's a guide of violences, and there's a series of generical violences. And depending on what the diagnosis says, like Tika was saying, different strategies should be acquired when city councils commit to these actions. They will have to bear in mind these questions. And regarding the police in the schools, we are promoting and supporting another kind of mediation, another kind of work in the schools for community mediation, for a different kind of mediation. I hope this answers your question. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for your participation and assistance. Our intention in this panel was to tackle these actions for buildings that are happening in the cities, to try and overcome violence problems that are affecting the city very strongly, which they are going away from criminalization and trying to sort out these problems in a different way, through a different way to just judicializing these problems, and this is what we would like to continue working on, because we're only starting. I think we're all clear on this. In the cities, there are many problems, but when it comes to tackling violence and security in the cities, it will always be the least relevant politician that will be in charge of that, who will be in charge of that. Just, we're not going to be doing big things then. Just leave it up to the police, but that's not the way it should be. Why are these the only departments that don't have their own staff? Why are these departments deviating all this task to the police? Of course the police have their part, but in the action, the social action, of course this cannot be a task of the police. And the police and our society needs to change also in this respect, in this aspect. And this is the conclusion for the day, but we'll keep on working.